Good evening, everybody. We have solved our technological challenges, we hope, and we are going to start. My name's Hal Roth. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Contemplative Studies program at Brown. I see a lot of new faces here, so I'll take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about Contemplative Studies, what it is, what we do. We are one of the newest concentrations, having started in September 2014. And what we do is we study contemplative experience across cultures and across tradition, from scientific, humanistic, and artistic points of view. The other particularly important aspect that we've developed here is that what we call critical first-person engagement. So traditional third-person approaches are the kinds of approaches that we find in most of our classes, the kind of looking at a subject at a distance. And we certainly use those and apply those. They're very important. But we temper those with what we call critical first-person approaches. In critical first-person approaches, we study a particular contemplative practice. We study the cognitive framework, the historical and philosophical context in which that practice is embedded. But unlike what might happen in a contemplative practice center, we do not ask, we do not expect, we do not force you to believe in the truth, in the veridicality of that cognitive framework. And that's a very important, it's easy to say, it's more complicated to do. So we have a series of courses. If you go to our website, you can find a list of our courses, our professors, and a lot more about our programs. We have videos of past lectures from starting about 10 years ago. We have a short video about contemplative studies that's about 5 years old that we're hoping to update soon. And we have a list of events that we organize every year. Every year we organize 10 or 12 different lectures and workshops. And this fall, we have a number of them, starting with this evening's lecture and tomorrow's workshop by Lama Rod Owens. If you're interested, please, when you're on the website, you can sign up for the listserv, and then you won't miss any of our events. And I want to be sure to tell you that next Wednesday evening, we will also have a lecture. I can't remember where it is, but anyway, if you go to the website, it's on campus, and it's Professor Charles Hallisey of the Harvard Divinity School, who'll be talking about classical Buddhist contemplative poetry. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Lama Rod Owens. Lama Rod was recognized by the Kagyu School of Tibetan Buddhism after receiving his teaching authorization from his root teacher, the Venerable Lama Norhal Rinpoche. He did this after completing a 3-year silent retreat program at Kagyu Thubten Cholung Monastery in the Catskills. It was during that time that he dealt with, as he says on his website, years of past pain and trauma, and found forgiveness and compassion for himself, which he views as a critical step before truly being able to help others. Since coming out of retreat, he has completed a Master of Divinity degree at Harvard Div School, and he practices, studies, and teaches secular mindfulness with the Inward Bound Mindfulness Organization, where he's a faculty member. He's also heavily engaged in social change activism and is co-author of an important book, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, and Jasmine Sedula, who I'm very proud to say was a student of mine here and my advisee in religious studies. He graduated in 2001, who's now a professor at Vassar. Before introducing Lama Rod, I want to read a poem that I found on his website, which I find particularly moving, especially at this point in time, where it's a kind of a time of hopefully temporary darkness in this country and throughout the world, and from a perspective that maybe opens up a bit of light on that darkness. It's from a collection of poems by Lama Rod called Glimpses of an Autumn Sky. It's a very short poem. Your sky has no edge or borders, no territory, No ground to gain, no secrets, no limit that means tomorrow. Yes, this thunder in my head, ache in my sadness, steady tremble in my eyes, constant rise and fall of sun and moon. They only mark the change of time. Still your voice is the heartbeat of unseen rain that calls me home. Please join me in welcoming Lama Rod Owens.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see all you here on a Friday evening where you could be doing something much more interesting, like Netflix. I never went to a lecture on Friday night, so I was like, I'm very impressed. I'm so honored to be here at Brown. As Professor Roth just mentioned, Yasmin Sadula was a student here and came into practice here. And she is one of my co-authors, but much more importantly than that, she's like one of my sisters, who's doing excellent work in the abolition movement and prison abolition right now. And she has fantastic work that's coming out soon. So, and she got started here. This is where we started. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting excited. Tara is such an important practice for me. And when I say practice, I mean the system of ritual practices that actually connects me to my own innate wisdom, my own innate Buddha nature, we would say. So that's one way of describing my relationship to the practice. Another way of describing my relationship to Tara is by talking about my devotion to Tara herself, devotion to what she represents in the world right now, and what she is often called into the world to do, which is to guide us into a space, into a way of being that is a reduction of violence. And that reduction of violence comes through the expansion of empathy for ourselves. And that empathy is directed outwards into empathy for others around us. So she connects our suffering with the suffering of so many people around us. And quite honestly, the lack of empathy is perhaps one of our needs, or one of the obstacles that we're experiencing right now in our country, the inability to touch into our own discomfort and the lack of ability to even consider the suffering of others. So welcome to this talk, this presentation. Today I want to kind of look at a little bit of thinking around the system of practice Tara comes from, which is Tantra. Talk a little bit about how she shows up in the iconography. When we look at traditional iconography within Tantric traditions, and I brought my own tanka, which is an iconic representation of the deity. When we look at these images, we're actually looking at a sophisticated code, a language, not just a pretty picture of a pretty woman, you know. So this is Tara represents a peaceful being, a peaceful deity. Then we have images of wrathful beings, which are quite challenging to work with, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. So in front of me, this is my, I call this my mother altar, and I keep a couple of altars in my space at home. And this altar is designed to kind of hold and embrace different representations of what I call the mother in different traditions. Not just in Vajrayana, but in Catholicism, also in Eastern Buddhism as well. And this helps me to channel the essence of the mother, which we would say in Tantric traditions would be the essence of nurturing, the essence of protecting. It reminds us, rather this reminds me that there are beings, people in the world who care for me, you know, that Tara has manifested in so many different ways in my life, not just as my actual mother, but has manifested in all the acts of kindness that others have shown me. You know, we say that Tara manifests in any act of deep compassion and kindness in our lives. So to begin with, to evoke a little bit of the presence of the mother, I would like to invite you, and this is completely optional, to invite you just kind of call the energy of nurturing into your own experience. And there are so many lineages and strands of practices associated with mother lineages, not just in Tibetan Buddhism, but also within Hindu lineages, and also secular compassion for those of us who study that. But for me, this basic practice is simply remembering and calling to mind those beings in my life who have shown me compassion. Sometimes we actually kind of skip over. Like when we're receiving compassion, receiving kindness, we kind of skip over it. It's not really a big deal. But this is a practice that actually helps us to sit with an act of kindness. You know, sit with someone who's offered us something that we really need. Someone who maybe let us skip in line in front of them. You know, someone who offered us a kind word when we most needed it. Someone who let us cry on their shoulders. You know, the kindness of our families, the kindness of our partners, you know, the kindness of our fellow classmates, our professors. Kindness is always happening, and the practices of the mother help us to actually embrace those acts of kindness that are always happening. The world is always trying to love us, you know, but part of our discomfort actually arises when we block actually receiving that kindness, because maybe we don't like the person. You know, maybe the person isn't wearing the right pair of blue jeans, or maybe they didn't go to the right school. You know, all kinds of things, you know, or maybe we're afraid of them. So just to begin with, I want you just to notice your feet on the floor, just noticing your feet. So the ground is so important in our initial practices. So noticing our feet on the floor, noticing our bodies in the seats. And allowing yourself to trust that the seat will hold you. And taking a few moments to reflect on the acts of kindness that you've been a recipient of just today. And as you reflect, noticing how these acts of kindness, as you reflect on them, have an impact in your mind, in your body. You can think about and reflect on any other act of kindness that you've ever experienced in your life. And just notice how that makes you feel. And as we move out of this session of practice, begin to say to yourself, may I experience the deepest well-being, happiness, and joy. May I be free from suffering. May I have everything that I need to be okay. And may my acts of kindness begin to deepen for others around me. So you may slowly begin to open your eyes if they're closed and returning your attention to the floor, to the seat. Coming back into the space. So thank you. Thank you so much for this practice, for your practice. And that practice was just a simple example of how within Tantric traditions of Buddhism in particular, we begin to invite the energy of the mother, the energy and the presence of the female quality of enlightenment. And so for today, I would like to just go through a few, hopefully not too heavy, points around of Tara, some of her origins, some of the systems of thinking and practice that she emerges from, to also leading into, talking about some of her physical characteristics within some of the classic iconography, and then hopefully talk a little bit about within Tantric traditions, the science of compassion. How does a practice like Tara actually evoke compassion? And then I would like to just have some open discussion and dialogue. And I want there to be lots of time for that, particularly to look at what does Tara mean for us right now, today? How do we bring Tara into much of the trauma and much of the struggle that so many of us have been experiencing? Not just this week or this year, the past couple of years, but for many of us who have been survivors of different forms of violence and trauma our whole life. So this practice for me, Tara, and my relationship to the practice has been transformative. And I am someone who was not really into anything like this. I wasn't raised with stuff like this. I was raised in the Deep South, in the Bible Belt outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So this was all the devil here. We didn't get anywhere close to this when I was growing up. So it's quite fascinating that I kind of got here and in my relationships. So it's really important that we start with an understanding of Tantra. So Tantra is a heavily overused word for us right now. And often when we hear the word Tantra, what do we think about? Yeah, which is not what it really is. It's eroticism is a part of Tantra, but that's a very Western fixation on something that we're very immature about. So Tantra actually means system. It means web. And this system is quite complex. Even though I like to oversimplify it, it is actually quite complex. And Tantra is a Sanskrit word. So when we talk about Buddhist Tantra, so when we say Buddhist Tantra, we're actually talking about a complex system of practices developed to help a practitioner awaken to their innate Buddhahood. Innate Buddhahood means that each sentient being, each animal, each person, human being, each formless being has the ability or is endowed with a mind that is clear from delusion. So that's what we call our innate Buddhahood. No matter how evil someone is, and hypothetically speaking, maybe we have a president that maybe personifies evil, which is like a fairy tale, I know. Even that person, hypothetically, has a Buddha nature. And within Buddhist Tantra, this is what we rely on. You know, we say, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, at the end of the day, you have this quality. You know, you may be very, 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 very far away from recognizing that, but you have this quality. And so therefore, you're not lost. And that's an important part of how we begin to understand compassion within the system. So Buddhist Tantra is also recognized as Vajrayana. Vajrayana, Vajra meaning diamond, Yana meaning path or vehicle. So we call this the diamond path, or the Vajra path, the indestructible path. It is a perfect path often, which is the connotation. Tibetan Buddhism is a Vajrayana tradition. So Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana and Tantra aren't synonymous. Often we assume it is, but Tibetan Buddhism is a tradition within Vajrayana Buddhism. So the origins of Vajrayana. So Vajrayana is rooted within the early Mahasiddha movement in medieval northern India. So the Mahasiddhas were these ascetics who practiced outside of the monastic communities, which was very countercultural in that culture because Buddhism came and was established in India, and it was a monastic institution. And it certainly spread as a monastic institution once it spread into Tibet as well. So these Mahasiddhas, they practiced outside in caves and woods and charnel grounds, which are cemeteries. So who's ever been to a charnel ground before in India and so forth? So charnel grounds actually are open burial sites where bodies are actually kind of laid out in public and not buried. And so they would actually go to these places and practice. They would come together in communities and they would practice rituals called the Ganachakra. In Tibetan, we call it the sok. The Ganachakra, or sok, is a communal practice that emphasizes a variety of ritual practices, which did include sex, but it also include chanting and included visualizations and included food. Often our Ganachakras are related to actual feasts, so it's actual food related kind of gatherings. So they took the taboo as the path. And this is what we have to understand about the Mahasiddhas. They did everything that was countercultural for them in that period, you know, so that ostracized them quite a bit. So this is the actual roots of how we begin to understand Vajrayana. Vajrayana was a countercultural movement. This particular point is why so many people, particularly in my circles of work, really are questioning if Vajrayana or Tantra is suitable for many of us right now, given its roots. So again, Vajrayana is a collection of skillful practices, including but not limited to mantras, visualizations, meditation, ritual, and philosophy that helps practitioners perform awakened activity in order to unlock the reality of one's awakened nature. You know? So essentially, we are moving into this relative space. We're using our senses and our sense faculties of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and so forth. And we're saying, okay, I'm going to take what I perceive as the path itself, and I'm going to get to the nature of it. And I'm going to use these practices to completely pull the rug from under me. So Vajrayana is very much a risk that we take in our practice. So a few other characteristics of Vajrayana. Vajrayana is known as the fast or greater vehicle. So we have three main vehicles. in Buddhist studies, Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. Now, the Vajrayana is an extension of the Mahayana vehicle, but we often recognize Vajrayana as a third vehicle. And these vehicles, these groups of teachings emphasize different aspects of what the Buddha taught in his life. Of course, the controversy with Vajrayana is that maybe the Buddha didn't teach those practices. So you get a lot of like flack, at least I do from my friends in the lower vehicles.
Slower.
About really a lot of questioning. You know, I was just teaching a retreat with a insight teacher, a mindfulness teacher, and they were like, "What is this Vajrayana?" Literally, and I was like, "Come to my presentation at Brown." Deity yoga really is a huge characteristic. Deity yoga, like Tara, there are countless deities that we practice with in the Vajrayana. The purpose of deity yoga is to actually help us to understand that we are already enlightened, you know, which I'll talk about a little bit soon. But the deity yoga is a recognition of our innate Buddhahood, but that's not outside of ourselves. So we begin to look at Tara. Tara is not separate from our own minds, our own experiences. There's no external gods that one would worship, but it's the recognition that I am already this enlightened, perfected being, and I want to fake it till I make it in a way. And as I do that, I am beginning to awaken these qualities about myself. This is why it's known as the fast path of the greater vehicle, because we kind of skip to being enlightened, you know, or performing enlightenment. Whereas, you know, the other vehicles maybe are emphasizing purification of some of our qualities, you know. But we say we're already there, you know, so let's do it. Which, of course, gets us into all kinds of trouble. Mahamudra, Dzogchen are philosophical systems of meditation that relate to how we're able to understand the nature of reality and how to actually experience the nature of reality. I am a Mahamudra practitioner in my school, which Mahamudra translates as the Great Seal. So essentially, Mahamudra means that because things arise, we can actually say, well, they're also, because they arise, they actually have the essence of emptiness, you know, and luminosity or potential, which is very complex, you know, but the Great Seal, the Great Mudra, that reality is always gesturing back to its nature. So everything arises out of emptiness. Because it arises, we know that like it's going to come back into emptiness. I call it the great wave. It comes up and it goes back down. You know, that's very complex, and maybe I'll flesh it out a little bit more when we get into talking about the iconography. The 6 yogas, very traditional within Vajrayana practices. The yogas are manifestations of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. They are actual ritualistic practices that one practices in order to have an experience of the nature of reality. Sadhana practice. Sadhana is the actual ritualistic practice that one engages in. So it's actually you know, more or less a book that one gets, you know, and a book, maybe we talk about the sadhana for Tara. You get this book, and it's a complete step-by-step practice that helps us to engage with the energy of Tara. And it's chanting, it's visualization, and it's imagining offerings, it's evoking generosity. So sadhanas actually begin to kind of trigger us on multiple levels. And indigenous. Particularly with Tibetan Buddhism, you know, Tibetan Buddhism is so different because as Vajrayana was ending in India, it was spreading into Tibet, and it began to encompass and to embrace the indigenous practices of Tibetans during that period, which is why we have such a unique flavor, particularly in the Tibetan expression of Vajrayana. which I love, actually. So Tara, the female Buddha of compassion. So let's get specifically into Tara. So Tara, her name means star. And in some of these ancient cults associated with this particular expression of Tara, she was also very associated with navigation and the sea. And the emphasis was that she guides a practitioner to the land of enlightenment over the sea of suffering. Does anyone follow or read Ken Wilber? Is he not popular anymore? I would, if this intrigues you, I would read Grace and Grit, which is a biography of the loss of his wife. I think in the late 80s or early 90s. And Tara and the motif of the star, such an important part of their journey as she was dying. And how Tara became such an integral part of how they understood the dying process and afterwards. So it's an excellent book if you can stand Ken Wilber. If you can't stand him normally, you will love this book. Drolma is Tara's name in Tibetan. Drolma or Dolma, depending on the pronunciation, but in Tibetan, Dolma means, Dol actually, or Drol means to liberate. So when it's Drolma, we actually say that that's a female personification of the work to liberate. So we simply kind of break that down to the mother of liberation. I often say the mother liberator. So Tara as protector, guide, and navigator, which is the essence of her blessings within these practices. So we have a lot of roots within Hindu practice. So possible Hindu roots with the goddess Durga. And within that system, Tara is considered one of the Mahavidyas of Shaktism. And so Shaktism is a practice and worship of the female element within creation and within life, which is a very strong sect within what we understand to be Hinduism. So we do have some proof that Tara may have emerged from these early communities who were trying to understand the feminine quality of life and how Tara became one of those goddesses that helped them to understand that. So just to kind of look at some of the qualities of a classic representation of Tara. I have to use my notes here because it's quite extensive. So looking around the outside of the Tanka here, at the sky and the clouds, the thinness of the air, it really represents the atmosphere in Tibet. So this is a Tibetan style representation. And just imagine that someone's sitting on a mountain ledge high up in the Himalayas. They're looking out over the landscape and they're beginning to have visions of these deities. So the idea is that this is the perspective of someone on top of a mountain looking at the rising of an image of a deity. So this is why you see things in the background, in this nature. So the air, the clouds, the sky represents nature of mind. The crispness, the clarity of nature of mind. The greenery under her actually represents what we would call her Pure Land. So every deity within Tantric Buddhism is associated with a heaven, and that you can practice really hard, come into a certain awareness and realization, die and be reborn in this kind of heaven. It's not an ending place. It's a way for us to continue doing practices to get us into full awaken. So it's like, I don't know, you practice really hard in high school, you get really good grades, and you get into a good school like Brown. Then you're like, oh, I've made it to heaven. Until you get there, and you're like, oh, it's like nice, but I'm ready to graduate. So that's the. So the aura lines right here, so these are lines of energy that radiate from her heart center. And that represents a kind of enlightenment for a deity, for any deity actually, that we see that represented. It also represents wisdom and compassion for the deity themselves. And you see Tara sitting on a lotus. And of course, the lotus is a very important symbol in Buddhism, particularly also in Vajrayana Buddhism. And the lotus represents purity, renunciation. It also has a meaning as a divine womb. So we have stories of a great teacher saint called Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, who was one of the great teachers who established Buddhism in Tibet. So he was born from a lotus. So a lot of that energy kind of relates to the idea that one is born from a lotus. On top of the lotus, you may not be able to see this, you see a little speck right here. So she and most deities are actually sitting on a sun and moon disk. And so an actual, within the case of Tara, the sun and moon disk are conflated together, and it represents the coming together of different strands of awareness and enlightenment, or different strands of practice that produce awareness and enlightenment. You see her sitting with her right leg extended, right here. This makes her quite unique within the pantheon of deities because most deities sit in full lotus. So the idea that like, oh, I'm just going to sit in the lotus and not do anything and just be enlightened. However, within the mythology around Tara, she sits with her right leg extended because it communicates the swiftness of her practice. So you begin to call on Tara, and compassion is right there. She jumps right in to helping you into whatever you may need her to do. Her color green represents action, represents the fruition of karma. With her hands, she's doing two specific mudra or hand gestures. The hand mudra, where her palm is extended down, her hands are extended down, that's the mudra of granting refuge. So all are welcomed to be with her. Her other hand holding the flower is the mudra that grants what we would say is a boon granting mudra. So a boon is a level of realization, So when one practices really well, has an awakening, they're born into a pure realm. In that pure realm, we would say that a person has acquired the first boon. So you have enough awareness of who and what you are that you'll never, ever fall back into these ways of being within the relative world. So you say that you're climbing up the side of that boon there. And there are 10 boons, or 10 boomies. So once you get to the 10th, you jump off the 10th, you're enlightened. If you believe in that. The blue lotus that's extending from her left hand represents purity and power. So she's also adorned with silks and jewels, and these are very classic, very traditional ways of signifying that the image that you're looking at, the figure that's being represented, is indeed a Buddha. Because Buddhas love a lot of wonderful accessories and silks. So so this image of Tara is a Sambhogakaya representation. Sambhogakaya means energy body. So there are 3 different ways that we relate to reality, to the phenomenal world within Tantra. The first way is through the Nirmanakaya. So the Nirmanakaya is just the actual representation of reality. Like you see everything, you touch everything, we're born into this reality, that's Nirmanakaya. Sambhogakaya is the realm of the deities. Again, the deity is not outside ourselves, it's just another way that we express ourselves, that we're learning how to see through the purification of our mind, through tantric practices. And then the ultimate nature of mind is the Dharmakaya. So that's the emptiness, that's the openness that we're really interested in, and that's the nature of all reality, this emptiness, this openness. But this is not completely empty, it's a suchness. It's within Hindu Tantra, sunyata. Sunyata means emptiness, but it doesn't mean complete emptiness. It means it's empty, but there's a quality there that we can't necessarily name. So it's not a nihilism. I call it warmth or potential. So getting into Tara and compassion, and then we're going to kind of wrap it down to get into some discussion. So what does Tara and compassion have to do with each other in terms of practical things? So Theta Yoga is a practice of tasting emptiness. So when we are practicing within a tantric practice, we begin to imagine ourselves as the deity. The deity is a Sambhogakaya manifestation, which means that there's a sense of emptiness there. It's a sense that we start taking ourselves less seriously. So it's quite functional, because once we say, I am Tara, then there's a kind of disruption of our fixation on our egos, or to our egos. And within all Buddhist practice, we're really, really concerned with our relationship to ego. Ego means the self-existing self. So we're trying to disrupt our connection to that in order to experience a spaciousness. So there's not this me and other, but instead it becomes us, it becomes we. I begin to see myself as you. So empathy is a practical way that we begin to disrupt fixation around ego. So when we do deity yoga, we're disrupting fixation, and we're saying, okay, I'm going to imagine myself as Tara, which is this super, super deeply compassionate being. And maybe I'm Tara. Maybe I can actually do that. I can actually be really compassionate. And this is what deity yoga actually helps us to understand and bring into our everyday living. So the recognition of emptiness is the fruition of wisdom. So wisdom means that we begin to see the nature of things, the clarity of everything. We're not so deluded. So we could say that we're living in a time where wisdom just isn't like a thing that people are interested in. We're interested in a particular storyline that makes us feel a certain way, but we're not actually interested in seeing the truth of things, the emptiness of things, the clarity. That will always breed violence. So wisdom helps us to see that we are like other beings trapped. We are like other beings trapped. So I'm able to say, you know what, I'm really struggling and I'm trying to understand what the truth is. I think I know what's right, and maybe you have the same idea. Maybe you think you know what's right. I wonder if I can have some patience, some openness for your fixation on what's right for you. That gets us into trouble as well. So we exchange self for other. So I becomes we. So it's not that I'm suffering. I am suffering, that's the truth, but we all are suffering. It's us. We're in this together. And that comes all the way from this disruption or fixation around ego. I'm able to have the space to say, you know what, there are other people in the world. That's fascinating. And they want the same thing I do. But maybe they're not actually going about it in a really good way. Particularly, if you're in certain traditions or fields of governance. We empathize more deeply. So empathize first and foremost begins with a consideration of our own basic experience. We're not afraid of ourselves anymore, and that makes us less afraid of other people. I can touch into my own discomfort because of these practices, because of going through these steps of understanding emptiness and ego, So I know what my suffering is, and I get insight into the suffering of others around me. We feel less alone. Yeah. I think that's something that many of us experience when we begin to experience empathy. You know? So empathy is the root of compassion, but compassion itself is not just an empathy with others, but it's a wish, an aspiration that all beings are free from the suffering, from the discomfort that they experience. You know, that no one is too evil not to be a recipient of that aspiration. So compassion comes into fulfillment when it's put into action. So it's an aspiration. I want everyone to be free from suffering. But then we act and we do something. And that's the embodiment of Tara. It's the action. It's when we actually get off of our seats and move into helping people. You know, and we understand wisdom, we have a sense of wisdom, we have a sense of deep, deep empathy, and that guides us into being beneficial for others. So if we don't have wisdom, if we don't have a deep empathy, then we potentially create a lot of harm. You know, we call it often stupid compassion, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm just going to help people. You know, I'm going to give you all this stuff. Maybe you don't need stuff, you know, but it actually makes us feel good. And that's not compassion, you know. So, so when we bring all these elements together, we're actually fulfilling the nature of Tara and the nature of compassion. And this is Tara's mantra. Tara Tutare Soha. And all deities have a mantra. So the mantra is a sound system that relates to evoking certain energies within the body. Also evoking different activities within the chakras. You know, so this is very, very, very complex system, which is done in collaboration with visualizations and with chanting and so forth. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. So I would like to just, you know, take any questions in the last 15 minutes or so. We have is 7, right? And, yeah.
Yeah, we could take a half hour.
Okay. Okay, great. Right in the corner there.
Hi there.
Hi.
So it looked like, so I actually have 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like from the imagery that you're actually talking about green Tara, is that correct?
Oh, it's green Tara, correct.
Okay. And so I'm wondering, the first question is, green Tara's relationship to all the 21 Taras,
Mm-hmm.
and secondarily, green Tara's relationship to Prajnaparamita.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're all the same. So it's
part I know.
yeah. Which that's how you'll get every question on the test, right? It's like, what's the difference? There's no difference. So green Tara, so there are 21 manifestations of Tara, and each manifestation of Tara has a different color. And within our you know, the practices or within the commentaries, each Tara does something different. But ultimately, each Tara is just an emanation of the same energy. You know, so within, you know, tantric traditions, what early people were trying to do was figure out energy, essentially. And so to figure out energy, they started personifying energy. You know, that's how we have the whole pantheon of Hindu gods and goddesses. That's how it began to influence Buddhist Tantra. So this is just ways for us to relate to different kinds of energy. So green Tara is a active energy, it's a swift energy. White Tara, for instance, is another major Tara, is a motherly energy. You know, it's an energy that relates directly to fear. It helps to reduce fear for us. Prajnaparamita is the goddess and the female personification of wisdom, and Prajnaparamita is said to be the mother of all Buddhas, because Prajnaparamita is the personification of not just wisdom, but also spaciousness. So each female deity is a what we would say an emanation of Prajaparamita. So any female deity is the mother of all Buddhas, we would say. So it's not so complex, but it gets really fine. We get really detailed about, okay, what does this image represent? What does this goddess represent, or what, and so forth. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned early on that Tara represents like the female qualities of Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what the female qualities are and what the male qualities are, and like when and how it became gendered in that way.
Yeah, that's a very complex question because gender doesn't exist. Oh yes. So what are the female qualities within Buddhism? And I guess what are the male qualities? And how do they get so gendered? So that's a very relative question, meaning that like we're creating gender and saying, well, this is female and this is masculine. Ultimately, these energies are just energy. So we have something like Shakti, for instance, for Shaktism. You're dealing with Shakti, which is the female driving energy of the universe. And we say it's female, which is true on a relative level, but ultimately not really. Again, it was this way for people early on to try to think about, okay, why are people different and what does that have to do with energy? Why do women or female-bodied people have babies? So they must be really different. So there's a different energy and quality, and because they're able to have babies, then they have a different relationship to all beings, which would be different than what a male-bodied person would experience, if that makes sense, I think we get kind of super caught up in making these gendered energies really like separate and different, whereas in my practice, I'm actually trying to like dissolve that and trying to understand not just gendered energy, but rather how different energies do different things, in the world. So I have a question right in the very back, and we'll come back to the front. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. A really interesting talk. I guess I'm interested to hear a little more about like applying
Oh yeah.
concepts of Tara to say like something current. So like if you're comfortable with it, like say the Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination. So how could what's going on with that? For example, how could some of the concepts of Tara apply to that, or anything else that you'd be comfortable with sort of in current?
Justice, social issues, and the application of Tara is my favorite thing to talk about ever. So, first of all, it's about our relationship to the deity. So we kind of figure that out. I practice in the Shaktism lineage as well. I practice in the mother lineage on top of Vajrayana Buddhism. And I personally find myself very devoted to the quality of nurturing and compassion within my own experience, So I am the mother, and for me, identifying those qualities within my own body actually has been a primary way that's helped me to begin to look at the ways in which I've been conditioned to be an agent of patriarchy. So that nurturing has actually helped me to hold space for the violence I was taught to participate in this body. If you read, I have an article, Women Hold My Hand, which is out somewhere. It came out at Harvard. And I talk about that a little bit. Talk about how Tara has been important for me in terms of helping me to cut down on the violence of patriarchy, both to myself and to others around me. For me, it's remembering the kindness in the world. Remembering that when I see people do really stupid, ignorant, evil things, I remember that they still have the quality to awaken. They are innately Buddhas, but because of ignorance, because of delusion, they're making choices that perpetuate violence for themselves and for others. So I always remember that. If I don't remember that, then I objectify people and I dehumanize them. In the same way, many people have tried to dehumanize me. So the workings of oppression is that the people who know how to reproduce oppression really well are not just the oppressors, but also the oppressed, too. So much of what it means to identify within an oppressed group in terms of liberation means that we actually have to remember how easy it is to dehumanize and objectify others because of the ways that we've been dehumanized and objectified. And again, contemplating and sitting with the qualities of Tara, the qualities of compassion and nurturing and kindness actually helps us to reconnect to our humanity, and it helps us to it reminds us that other people are human too. And other people want to be free from suffering, other people want to be happy, regardless of the stupid things that they do. Also regardless of the stupid things that I do. Like, why am I so special? Like, how am I so enlightened all of a sudden? When I don't agree with someone, I become enlightened. So it's a double-edged sword, really. It's like, yeah, like, I don't agree with you, but it doesn't mean that you're ultimately wrong. Though I really, really believe it. Compassion, and just going a little further, compassion for us right now is really how we take care of ourselves and how we practice self-care. As Audre Lorde has written, self-care is self-preservation, and self-preservation is an act of political warfare, which is quite jarring, it's quite triggering, but self-preservation means that systems of violence are not fulfilling their duty, their role, which is to annihilate you. So it is warfare in a way, it is political, and so we can only do that if we create ethics of care for ourselves and for the communities that we're a part of. We have to be sustainable, but we also have to be kind. And being kind and compassionate and loving doesn't mean that you don't set boundaries, that you're not using violence sometimes, but you just get very clear about why you have to do the things that you're doing. Are you really considering perhaps that a person is out of control and that you want to limit and reduce the violence that they do to themselves and the violence that they do to others, which is a very different motivation than just like wanting to get back at someone because you're pissed. So these practices, Tara Chenrezig, which is the Bodhisattva of love within Tibetan Buddhism, these love practices, kindness practices, compassion practices remind us that we and others are the same. But if you're a devotee, in one of the lineages, then you begin to, develop a very intimate relationship with the deity themselves. And that's when you get into the manifestation of certain blessings and certain, what we would call, cities, which are, kind of qualities that manifest as our mind is purified through these practices. And when I say mental purification, what I mean is that the inflictive emotions, the really strong emotions begin to kind of die down, and we begin to have a very strong experience of clarity, which is wisdom. And we see things very clearly. We don't just see it from our perspective, but we see all the perspectives over time. So we're not the center of the world, the center of the universe. We're decentered, but we're not erased. We're just, okay, I'm just going to put myself here, and therefore I can have space to see all this other stuff that's happening. Okay. Mm-hmm.
How do we continue to acknowledge differences in privilege while recognizing our fundamental similarity?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are important differences between people,
Mm-hmm.
and that arguably is really important to acknowledge when dealing with or showing care for others,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging the differences and how
Mm-hmm.
this impact how we
Mm-hmm.
provide care.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that?
So privilege, power, authority aren't bad words. So the perspective of Buddhism in particular is that it's not the thing itself. It's not privilege. Privilege isn't a problem, it's how you use it. Power isn't a problem, it's how you use it. And so I think first and foremost, it's a recognition of the thing itself. So let's talk about what privilege is. What does privilege allow me to do? What does authority allow me to do? How does this hurt people? And that's the way we begin to get into this, because privilege, this is a communal thing. It's like you're not just coming out into the world and saying, okay, I'm going to be X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to gain all this power. No, you're just given things. We're in cultures, we're in communities that are creating us without our consent. Now the issue is that when you begin to become aware of that creation, if you continue to participate in that creation, then you're the problem. I mean, you're a problem even if you're not aware, but you actually consciously are participating in something that you know to be harmful for others, and that's really what we're trying to get into. So yeah, these things are real. Yeah, relatively, this is absolutely real. This is really important. But you actually have to learn to disrupt your relationship to these things. And that's when we start talking about undoing patriarchy, and when we begin to think about divesting from whiteness, divesting from, ability, privilege, and so forth. You begin to have an awareness of what you're being given, and you're trying to cut through that as much as possible, knowing very well that it's going to be impossible to completely divest. And that's the spaciousness that we have to kind of show up to and hold. It's like, we're not going to completely get there, maybe, but we can do a lot of work to call into question these systems of harm that we're participating in. So it's not really that useful to be guilty, but it's quite useful if you want to deconstruct some stuff initially, And I think about my relationship to patriarchy. Yeah, it's it sucks, I have to you have to get to a point where you're like, this isn't fun, this sucks. Okay, great, I'm beginning divesting. Now what else? Cool. Anyone else? Mm-hmm.
You said a number of times you'd sort of make these aside. I feel like breadcrumbs, but that could get us into trouble. Or, well, this could make trouble too.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to try to pick up on a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
I only remember two.
Mm-hmm.
The one I remember was you said the origins of Tantra come from the Mahasiddhis, these countercultural types. And this has caused a lot of people in your community to wonder whether or not this is the right tool for you. Could you expand on that?
Absolutely. So there's a sentiment right now, particularly with contemporary teachers, where we're asking ourselves, should Vajrayana or Tantra be a household thing? Because it wasn't. It wasn't like people who did Tantra, Tantrikas, what we would call them, those people. That's how it's those people. We're not going to have anything to do. The monastics were doing that. Until we have these great Indian ascetics who crossed the line. They were like, okay, I'm tired of this. This isn't working. So I'm going to go study with one of these tantrikas and become untouchable in a way. Polite people didn't hang out at the Trono grounds. That's what's our equivalent? Oh, people don't go to Kmart. I don't know. You go to Target. I don't know what that would be, but good people don't go to Kmart. So I think in the West in particular, we have this phenomenon called cultural material spiritualism. Spiritual materialism, sorry. And that means that we become really fascinated with this stuff, with this history, and we take it on. It becomes a part of our identities, when in fact these practices are meant to cut through identity. But it becomes a function of our identity. We become these things, and then we get celebrated. And that's really not the origins of that tradition. You said that what all these people are doing, this comfort that everyone has acquired, that's really not helpful for us. So we're going to do something really uncomfortable. So we're going to walk around smeared in ashes and feces, you know.
So are you hoping to teach something less popular?
I'm hoping to teach something that will disrupt us and not make us feel good about ourselves.
This should do it then.
In theory. In theory. But then we get into the practice of the wrathful deities that really actually get into like these really intense forms of energy that arise in our experiences. And even those practices can be co-opted, you know? So the idea is not just to go around being countercultural, but the idea is that I need to actually understand all the different ways that I am fixated on my ego, and I need to disrupt those fixations, because without that, I'll never understand who I am. That's the point, really, of this. But when we start practicing and our identities become even more thick, you know, then that's the issue that I think that we're dealing with right now, particularly in the West. You know, particularly I would say in some of our Buddhist communities where whiteness is actually so normalized, then you're like, oh, this is like what our communities are supposed to be like, when in fact, that's just another layer of suffering and ego. You know, that the practices aren't getting into because we've kind of lost that edge. Not completely, but in the mainstream communities, we've lost that edge of Tantra that I'm really interested in kind of reclaiming. You know, to be, you know, quite honestly, to be in a marginalized identity is a really good start. You know, like for me, being Black and queer has been wonderful in terms of my relationship to Tantra. I was like, oh, like I'm already outside, you know? And so I can make a home here, you know, and then get deeper into that. And for me, going through retreat and embodying some of these practices, I've really had some really intense experiences around letting go, you know, of identity. You know, it's like, oh, what is, for instance, what does being Black mean? You know, I don't know anymore. I mean, I have a sense of it, but like, I'm not so tied to it, you know, to such an extent where like, yeah, you can call me any name that you want that related to like how you think I am as a Black person, but it really doesn't like, it's not a big thing anymore, because that's not who I am. This is how I show up in the world, but ultimately that's not my innate being. You know, so you have to have a dual taste. Like you have to have a sense of the relative, you also have to have a sense of the ultimate together. I am and I'm not, which is what we're trying to get to. This is what Tantra is trying to say. It's like, come into the middle and just be there, and let that just completely disrupt you. Let that completely make everyone around you uncomfortable. You know, and the good teachers I've studied with do that. Not because they have fun, but because they see that like my suffering is tied to my unwillingness to have a more complex understanding of the relative and the ultimate together. There was another question too. Okay, two. Okay, we'll come back. We'll get you two. Those will be the last two questions.
So I wanted to be sure that I was understanding the way you're talking about disruption.
Yeah.
That the way to disrupt the existing power structures is not to participate in the way in which we treat people we disagree with fundamentally as the other. Mm-hmm. To see the ground of our common nature, our common essence. Mm-hmm. It's easy, relatively easy to say that as an idea, but how to practice it. And if you can't see with your naked eyes what that common ground is, and it takes a long periods of practice to be able to do that, then what do you do in the interim, and how do you take that idea, which is based on an experience, and bring it into your life in a way that does fundamentally disrupt this way in which we participate in the power structures by treating people we disagree with, people who piss us off, as other.
Well, we're treating other people like we treat ourselves. And so really the foundation of that particular question is like, well, I need to actually completely humanize myself, so I know that humans are around me. I think that self-love, for instance, is really like the heart of this, because I love myself enough not to take away your humanity, because to take away your humanity is also going to take away my humanity. And that takes forever to do. I've been on that path, and I've done a lot of work around that. It's not just to like brag or anything, but like, I've had to sit through a lot of hate for myself and for others. Yes, people disappoint me, people scare me, I'm terrorized sometimes, I'm angry, I'm enraged. All of that's quite true. But at no point do I say that you're just this evil monster, because for me that's very dangerous to slip into that. I think that's when we start really doing violence. And if you're a monster, if you're an object, then I can do whatever I want to you.
That reinforces the existing system.
Yep.
So what you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about is radically breaking out of that way in which we reinforce it.
And just in going back to your questions around risk, this is part of it. It's like, well, if I do this, then I can't go back. And it's going to actually put me outside of society. No one wants to hear you walk around talking about how you love Donald Trump. I'm not saying you do that, but like there's really not a lot of space for that right now. Or Orrin Hatch or whomever that we can't stand right now. That's not what people want to hear. So if you start doing that, if any of us start doing that, then like we're going to get pushed out. That's what the Tantrikas were experiencing. They were like, oh, I get this now. And everyone's like, please shut the hell up. Now just go to the graveyard and stay there. And we see that. I see that happening every single day. I see people, in different forums who are like, no, like this is the way we have to be. And I see people being so ostracized and so marginalized. I myself too experienced that. But it's the practice of self-love. It's like, what? I kind of get a sense of who I am. So whatever you say has to kind of like go against what my experience of myself is. And knowing that like we are kind of walking around in communities and places and interactions where people are just projecting their own deep insecurity, their own deep fear onto us and onto everyone else. And you have to be strong enough in a practice of self-love or in a practice of the recognition of emptiness of self, whatever, to understand how not to embody another person's insecurity, another person's hate. It's very toxic right now. If you follow me on social media, if you know kind of the work that I do, I'm always emphasizing self-care, self-preservation, renunciation, restraints, boundaries, consent. These are the ways that we begin to create ways of taking care of ourselves, or rather we create the space for us to take care of ourselves. So we'll take the two last questions at the top there. Whomever. Oh, we'll just start here. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you talk to people in that realm that you have self-preservation, but you're everything else? Like, you're compassion, but where do you get that grounding? What's the middle ground? Being who you are and have a purpose versus you're connected to everything.
Well, I was raised in the Black community in the South, so I was never raised like that. It was like, oh, you're an individual. No, actually, we're all together. And we won't survive unless we're all together. in this thing. You know, I'm not saying that like that's like been super, super great, but I'm saying that's like it's been kind of countercultural. So this kind of hyper individualism that we've experienced. And when we say hyper individualism, what we're actually talking about is whiteness, you know? And so you actually have to, I think, again, self-love, self-compassion is at the root of this. You have to actually cut through these layers of identity to understand that like you can't be within a community because your identity, your primary identities have been antithetical to community. It's not about bringing together. It's not about being together. It's actually about excluding and othering. You know, so you actually have to kind of start dropping that. And to do that, you start, you do the self-love practice, you do compassion, but you actually have to start grieving. You know, and you have to start being really uncomfortable. And that starts inviting people into community with you. You know, when you say, I am really tired and upset and like, I didn't choose this, like, I'm creating so much harm, that's a really good step. And other people can go, oh, you know what? I feel that same way too. You know, and how do you start creating communities based upon letting go and divesting from harmful ways of being? You know, but not everyone's going to do that, nor is everyone interested in that kind of work, you know. But the vulnerability, which is exactly what I just described, is really important in terms of creating community with one another. You know. And last question?
I think it's transformed, actually. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Being there. I'm wondering, this experience of compassion, sometimes I've noticed people want to go to kind of, to go there really quickly.
Yeah.
And beat themselves up for feeling anger.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially when there's, you know, clarity that,
Yeah.
that anger brings
Yeah.
around the injustices that are happening,
Mhm.
or recognizing the way that they're being treated is with disrespect, and that there's a kind of an awakening to
Mhm.
that happens,
Mhm.
of the usefulness of anger, and then shame,
Mhm.
kind of, you know, shutting down, I shouldn't be feeling.
Yeah.
So this, and I'm just wondering how you kind of work with anger and how the compassion I can see can be like medicinal for that, but not bypassing the anger.
Mm-hmm. Well, compassion can definitely be used as a bypass. You know, I saw so many people after the election, they were like, I'm going to really try to love certain people. And I was like, well, good luck with that, and let me know how that turns out. And it didn't turn out. Because you actually, no one, well, a lot of people didn't go through the process of holding space for the rage. You know, because many of us have been conditioned, we've been, informed in certain ways that it's not okay for us to be angry. For me, in a black male body, I've been conditioned to understand that my anger can get me killed. You know, as I talk to a lot of female-identified folks, we understand that like anger is just not what ladies do. You know, because anger can really disrupt systems. You know, so we're going to take it away and shame you. And so we've internalized that shame in many ways. And so I think the best remedy is to actually just be angry, to be enraged, you know, and to say, who gives a fuck? I'm just going to be really enraged. But at the same time, how can we also say also that beneath the anger and the rage is also really deep hurt as well, that the anger is actually, and the rage is really taking care of that hurt for us. You know, I'm actually writing a book about this too right now, about anger and love in particular. You know, what love is actually, it takes care of our hurt and our sadness, but we get lost in responding to the anger because it makes us feel powerful. You know, when in fact anger is trying to get us to feel vulnerable. You know, and that anger, the energy of anger doesn't go anywhere. We just lose, rather the energy of anger is something that we have agency over. You know, so I can allow myself to be angry, but I don't have to respond to it. I don't have to react to it, but I can feel it. And I can channel that energy into wise, compassionate action when I am in dialogue with my suffering, because the suffering and the empathy in my own suffering connects me to the suffering of others. So when I begin to channel that energy, I know that there are people around me who are hurting. And that may be because perhaps I was hurt by someone. And maybe this practice can help me understand that I was hurt because someone else was hurting. For some of us who grew up within abusive environments at home in particular, and I think about some of the abuse that I experienced growing up, it was because the people who were the perpetrators were hurting. And they actually had no idea how to deal with it, and they just reacted to it. They reacted to the anger from the hurts, because that's the only example of relating to it that they saw. And so much of my practice is learning how to disrupt the transference of that violence into the next generation. I'm actually not going to respond to my anger, but I'm going to actually have agency over it and understand how important it is in helping me understand imbalances in the world, and helping me to understand when I've been hurt, and helping me to understand when boundaries have been crossed. I'm going to use it like that, but I'm not going to respond to it in order to hurt other people. So I think that's it. Thank you.